The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel and appeared in the space near Nexus Station. It was the most important place in the known galaxy. Here, 47 different alien species came together to talk, trade, and make decisions about the future of all living beings in the stars. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the UEN Prometheus and looked at the massive station through the viewing window. It was beautiful. Crystal towers and golden domes floated in the darkness of space, connected by bridges of light. Ships of every shape and color moved around it like fish swimming around a reef. "It is impressive," said Captain Marcus Webb, standing beside her. He was a tall man with gray hair and kind eyes. He had served in the human navy for 30 years. "It is," Elena agreed. "And today, we ask them to let us join." The human fleet was small. Only 12 ships had made the journey from Earth. The Prometheus was the largest, and even it looked tiny compared to the alien vessels nearby. The human ships were blocky and practical. They had thick metal plates on the outside and visible engines that glowed with orange fire. Compared to the smooth, glowing ships of the other species, they looked old and rough. Elena noticed an alien ship pass close to them. It was a Valkyrie vessel, made entirely of crystal, that caught the starlight and turned it into rainbows. The ship moved without any visible engines. As if by magic, she saw the Valkyrie crew looking at the Prometheus through their transparent walls. They were tall beings made of living crystal, and even from this distance, she could see them pointing and making gestures that looked like laughter. "They are amused by us," Captain Webb said quietly. "Let them laugh," Elena replied. "We did not come here to impress them with our ships. We came here to join their community." The human delegation was transported to the assembly hall inside the station. Elena walked with her team through corridors filled with aliens of every kind. There were the Chitrax, insects the size of humans who walked on 4 legs and spoke with clicking sounds. There were the Sithar, beings that looked like snakes with arms and wore robes of silk. There were dozens of other species, some beautiful and some strange. All of them looked at the humans with curiosity. Some whispered to each other. A few laughed openly. The assembly hall was enormous. It was a circular room with seats rising up like a stadium, and each section belonged to a different species. In the center was a platform where speakers could address everyone. Thousands of aliens filled the hall, and their voices created a constant noise like a river flowing. Elena walked to the center platform. She felt very small standing there, surrounded by beings who had traveled among the stars for thousands of years while humans had only just learned how. But she kept her back straight and her voice steady. "I am Ambassador Elena Vasquez of the United Earth Nations," she said. Her words were translated instantly into hundreds of languages. "Humanity comes before this assembly to ask for membership in the Galactic Concord. We wish to join you as friends, as partners, and as equals." She spoke for several minutes about Earth, about human history, about their hopes for the future. She talked about how humans wanted to learn from the other species and share their own knowledge. She spoke of peace and cooperation. When she finished, there was silence. Then the Valkyrie High Archon rose from his seat. He was the tallest of his kind, and his crystalline body glowed with inner light. He was ancient and powerful, and when he spoke, everyone listened. "We have observed your species," he said. His voice was like music, but there was no warmth in it. "We have seen your ships. They burn chemicals to move through space. They are held together with welded metal. Your technology is—" He paused, searching for a word. "Primitive." Laughter rippled through the assembly. The Chitrax clicked their approval. The Sithar hissed with amusement. "The Galactic Concord exists to unite advanced civilizations," the High Archon continued. "Species who have moved beyond such crude methods. Your ships still use fire, Ambassador. Fire belongs to the childhood of a species, not its maturity." Elena felt the eyes of thousands of aliens on her. She felt their judgment and their dismissal, but she did not let her expression change. With respect, "High Archon," she said, "fire is how humanity began. It is not something we are ashamed of." More laughter. The High Archon raised a crystalline hand, and the hall fell silent. "We will not grant humanity full membership," he announced. "However, we are not cruel. We will offer you provisional observer status. You may watch and learn. Perhaps in a few centuries, when you have evolved beyond burning things to travel through space, you may ask again." It was an insult wrapped in politeness. Elena understood that clearly, but she simply bowed her head. "We accept your offer," she said, "and we thank you for the opportunity to learn." She walked out of the assembly hall with her team. Behind her, she could hear the aliens talking and laughing about the primitive humans and their fire-breathing ships. Her assistant, a young man named David Chen, walked beside her with anger on his face. "How can you accept this?" he whispered. "They humiliated us. They showed us who they are," Elena replied calmly. "And we showed them only what we wanted them to see." David looked at her with confusion, but Elena did not explain. She simply walked back toward the Prometheus with patient steps. Captain Webb was waiting for her when she returned to the ship. He had watched the assembly through a video link, and his face was troubled. "That did not go well," he said. "It went exactly as I expected," Elena replied. She sat down in her chair on the bridge and looked out at the alien ships floating nearby. "They see our ships and they see weakness. They see our fire and they see primitives. They do not see us. Not yet." "And when will they see us?" Webb asked. Elena was about to answer when an alarm suddenly rang through the ship. A crew member called out from his station. "Ambassador, Captain, we are detecting something strange. Long-range sensors are picking up an anomaly at the edge of Concord space. It is very large, and it is moving this way." Elena stood and walked to the sensor station. On the screen, she saw a dark shape moving through the stars. No, not one shape. Thousands of shapes. Millions. They moved like a cloud, like a swarm, and they were heading toward the heart of the Concord. "What is it?" she asked. "Unknown," the crew member said. "But the Concord stations are going crazy. They are sending emergency signals everywhere. Whatever this is, they are afraid of it." Elena watched the swarm moving closer on the screen. She did not know what it was, but she felt something in her chest. It was not fear. It was recognition. She had seen humanity face impossible threats before. She had read the history of her people, full of wars and disasters and moments when everything seemed lost, and she knew, somehow, that this was the moment everything would change. "Send a message to Earth," she said quietly. "Tell them to prepare. I do not know what is coming, but I think we will be needed soon." Outside the window, the beautiful alien ships continued to float peacefully, their crews unaware that their comfortable universe was about to burn. The Kethvor had returned 10,000 years ago, before most of the current Concord species had even discovered fire. The Kethvor had swept through the galaxy. They were not alive in the way that flesh and blood creatures were alive. They were machines, but machines with a terrible intelligence. They existed only to consume, to grow, and to destroy anything that was not them. The ancient record spoke of 17 civilizations that had fallen to the swarm. Entire species had been wiped from existence. Worlds had been stripped of all resources and left as dead rocks floating in space. The founders of the Galactic Concord had fought the Kethvor in a war that lasted centuries, and in the end, the machines had simply vanished into the darkness between galaxies. Everyone believed they were gone forever. Everyone was wrong. High Archon Veltaris stood in the command center of the Concord's military headquarters and watched the reports coming in from the outer veil. His crystalline body, usually bright with inner light, had grown dim with worry. Around him, officers from a dozen species worked frantically at their stations. "How many?" he asked, his voice no longer musical but harsh with stress. "We cannot count them accurately," a Chitrax officer replied, his mandibles clicking rapidly. "Billions, perhaps trillions. They are emerging from dark space in waves that do not stop." Veltaris felt something he had not felt in centuries. Fear. True fear. "Send the first fleet," he ordered. "Our finest ships. We will stop them at the Veil before they can reach populated space." The Velkari First Fleet was the pride of the Concord. 200 ships made of living crystal, powered by energy drawn directly from the fabric of space itself. Their weapons could fire beams of pure light that moved at impossible speeds. They had never lost a battle. They were considered invincible. Admiral Kir Onis led the fleet personally. He was a veteran of 1,000 small conflicts, and he had never known defeat. As his flagship dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the outer veil, he looked at the Kethvor swarm and felt only confidence. "They are just machines," he told his officers. "Primitive things of metal and code. Our weapons will cut through them like light through shadow." He gave the order to attack. The Velkari ships fired their light beams. Brilliant lines of energy crossed the void and struck the first wave of Kethvor drones. The machines exploded in flashes of fire and debris. Direct hits, an officer reported. Thousands destroyed. But Kironis watched his sensors and felt his confidence begin to fade. For every drone they destroyed, 10 more took its place. The swarm was endless, a sea of metal bodies that stretched across the stars. Continue firing, he ordered. We will thin their numbers. But something strange was happening. The light beams that had been so effective at first were becoming less powerful. The drones were changing. Their hulls were shifting, becoming darker, absorbing the energy instead of being destroyed by it. Admiral, the enemy is adapting, an officer said, fear creeping into her voice. Our weapons are losing effectiveness. Switch to particle beams, Kironis commanded. They switched. The particle beams worked for a few minutes, tearing through drones by the thousands. Then the machines adapted again. Their bodies grew denser, deflecting the particles like armor. Quantum disruptors, Kironis said, desperation now clear in his voice. The quantum disruptors fired. They were supposed to tear apart matter at the atomic level. Nothing could survive them. But the Kethvor drones simply shifted their forms, becoming something that existed partially outside normal space. The disruptors passed through them without effect. The swarm reached the Velkari fleet. What happened next was not a battle. It was a massacre. The Kethvor drones swarmed over the crystal ships like insects over fallen fruit. They cut through hulls that were supposed to be unbreakable. They drained power from cores that were supposed to be infinite. They learned and adapted and grew stronger with every ship they killed. Admiral Kironis watched his fleet die around him. 200 of the finest ships in the galaxy, destroyed in less than 3 hours. He sent a final message to the conquered before his own flagship was torn apart. They cannot be stopped. They learn everything. They adapt to everything. May the stars forgive us for our arrogance. The message reached Nexus Station. High Archon Veltaris listened to it in silence. Around him, the other leaders of the Concord had gathered, Chitrax queens, Sithar elders, representatives from all 47 species. All of them wore the same expression of horror. What do we do? A Chitrax queen asked. If the First Fleet could not stop them, nothing can. We evacuate, a Sithar elder suggested. We flee to the far edges of the galaxy. Perhaps we can outrun them. You cannot outrun the Kethvor, Veltaris said bitterly. Our ancestors tried. They follow until there is nothing left to follow. Silence fell over the chamber. For the first time in thousands of years, the Galactic Concord had no answer. Their weapons were useless. Their ships were worthless. Everything they had built, everything they had achieved, meant nothing against an enemy that could adapt to any attack. A young Velkari officer stepped forward nervously. High Archon, there is one possibility we have not considered. Speak, Veltaris commanded. The humans, the officer said. Their technology is different from ours. They do not use energy weapons. They use physical things, chemical fires, metal projectiles. Perhaps the Kethvor have not learned to adapt to such methods. Laughter came from some of the gathered leaders. But it was weak laughter, without real humor. The humans? A Sithar elder hissed. Those primitives? Their ships are jokes. Their weapons are toys. Their weapons are different, the young officer insisted. And right now, different might be the only thing that can save us. Veltaris considered this. He remembered how he had mocked the human ambassador. He remembered the laughter in the assembly hall. He remembered his certainty that humans were nothing more than children playing with fire. But his fleet was gone. His people were dying. And the swarm was coming closer with every passing hour. Send a message to the humans, he said finally. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. Ask them. Ask them for help. The message was sent across the stars to Earth. It reached Ambassador Elena Vasquez, who had returned home after the assembly. She read it carefully, then read it again. A small smile appeared on her face. She sent a single reply. We will come. Prepare to see what fire can really do. Then she contacted Earth's military command and spoke 5 words that would change the history of the galaxy. Send the fleet. All of it. Deep in the shipyards of Luna and Mars and the asteroid belt. Lights began to turn on. Engines that had been sleeping began to wake. Crews that had been waiting began to move. The real human fleet was preparing for war. Admiral James Okonkwo stood in the command center of Luna Base and watched the mobilization order spread across the solar system. He was a large man with dark skin and white hair, and he had served in Earth's Navy for 40 years. He had fought pirates in the asteroid belt and rebels on the outer colonies. He had seen battle many times, but he had never commanded anything like this. "Open all the hidden shipyards," he ordered. "Every single one. It is time." Across the solar system, things began to happen. On the dark side of the moon, massive doors opened in the rocky surface. Ships began to rise from underground hangars that had been secret for decades. On Mars, hidden bases in the deep canyons revealed their contents. In the asteroid belt, hollowed-out rocks split apart to show the vessels waiting inside. The galaxy had seen 12 human ships at the Concorde assembly. Those ships were diplomats, designed to look harmless and primitive. They were meant to make other species underestimate humanity. It was an old trick, one that humans had used against each other throughout their history. The real fleet was something else entirely. 800 warships emerged from hiding. They were not elegant or beautiful like the alien vessels. They were brutal and functional, designed with only one purpose in mind: destruction. Commander Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UEN Inferno, a Helios-class destroyer. The ship was built around a single massive weapon, a fusion core that could focus the power of a small star into a beam of pure annihilation. She had trained for years to command this vessel. She had never expected to actually use it. "All systems are ready, Commander," her first officer reported. "The Inferno is prepared for combat." Sarah looked at the weapon readouts on her screens. The numbers there would have seemed impossible to anyone outside Earth's military. Temperatures measured in millions of degrees, energy outputs that could crack planets, fire concentrated and controlled and aimed like a spear of light. "Good," she said simply. "We will need everything we have." Similar conversations were happening across the fleet. On the Hammer of Sol, a ship designed to launch kinetic projectiles at near light speeds. On the Burning Sky, a carrier filled with thousands of thermobaric missiles. On the Last Argument, a vessel that could create artificial gravity wells strong enough to crush enemy ships into metal balls. These were not ships that asked questions or negotiated. These were ships that ended things. Admiral Okonkwo transported to his flagship, the UEN Prometheus Prime. It was the largest human warship ever built, a mobile command center bristling with weapons of every type. He took his seat on the bridge and looked at the faces of his crew. They were young and old, men and women, from every nation on Earth. They all had the same expression: determination. "Open a channel to all ships," Okonkwo ordered. His face appeared on screens across the fleet. 800 ships, carrying nearly 500,000 human beings, all listening to his words. "You all know why we are here," he began. "The Galactic Concorde mocked us. They called us primitive. They laughed at our ships and our weapons. They said we were children playing with fire." He paused, letting the words sink in. "They were right about one thing. We are creatures of fire. Our ancestors discovered fire 1,000,000 years ago, and it changed everything. Fire kept us warm when the world was cold. Fire cooked our food and made us strong. Fire lit our way through dark nights. And yes, fire burned our enemies and won our wars." His voice grew stronger. "The Concorde species evolved beyond fire. They found cleaner ways to make energy, more elegant ways to kill. They forgot what fire really is, but we never forgot. Fire is not just a tool. Fire is transformation. Fire is survival. Fire is the heart of what it means to be human." He stood up from his chair. "Now a great enemy threatens the galaxy. The Keth Vor adapt to everything the Concorde throws at them. Energy beams, particle weapons, quantum technology. They learn, and they change, and they overcome. But they have never faced humans. They have never faced fire." His final words rang across every ship. "Today, we show the galaxy what primitives can do. Today, we remind the universe that fire is not weakness. Fire is our greatest strength, and we will burn everything that threatens us until nothing is left but ash and victory." The fleet responded with a roar of voices. Across 800 ships, human beings shouted and cheered and stamped their feet. They were afraid, yes. Many of them would die in the coming battle, but they were also proud. Proud of their species, proud of their ships, proud of the fire that burned in every human heart. "Set course for the Calith Expanse," Okonkwo ordered. "That is where the Concorde remnants are making their last stand. We will meet them there." "Admiral," his navigation officer said, "at maximum speed, we will arrive in 12 standard cycles. Then we have 12 cycles to prepare." Okonkwo replied, Run every drill. Check every weapon. I want this fleet ready to fight the moment we arrive. The human ships began to move. Their engines burned bright, visible flames trailing behind them like the tails of comets. Other species used invisible drives and clean propulsion. Humans used fire, and they were not ashamed of it. In the Caliph expanse, the remnants of the Concorde fleet waited. They had gathered everything they had left. 200 ships from a dozen species, all preparing for a final battle they did not expect to survive. High Archon Veltaris had come personally to lead them. If his people were going to die, he would die with them. He received word that the human fleet was coming. 800 ships. The number surprised him. He had thought humans had only a handful of vessels. What kind of weapons do they have? He asked his officers. The reports came back. Kinetic impactors, thermobaric explosives, plasma projectors, fusion beam arrays, gravity generators, weapons that burned and crushed and tore. Veltaris read the reports with growing amazement. These were not the weapons of a primitive species. These were the weapons of a species that understood destruction in ways the Concorde had forgotten. Clean and elegant weapons were easy to adapt to. Brutal and varied weapons were not. For the first time since the Kethvor appeared, the High Archon felt something like hope. Perhaps, he said quietly to himself, we were wrong about the humans. In the void beyond the expanse, the Kethvor swarm continued its approach. Billions of drones, carrying the collective intelligence of a machine civilization that had destroyed 17 species. They did not feel hope or fear. They only felt hunger. They did not know that fire was coming for them. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel in the Caliph expanse, and the Concorde ships fell silent in shock. 800 vessels appeared in perfect formation. They were nothing like the small, crude ships the aliens had seen at Nexus Station. These ships were massive and terrifying. Their hulls were covered in thick armor plates, scarred and darkened like they had already been through 100 battles. Weapon barrels pointed in every direction. Engines burned with visible flame, bright orange against the blackness of space. High Archon Veltaris stared at the human fleet from his command ship. He had expected help. He had not expected this. By the light of the first stars, he whispered. What have they been hiding? Admiral Okonkwo opened a communication channel to all ships, human and alien alike. His face appeared on every screen, calm and steady. This is Admiral James Okonkwo of the United Earth Navy. We are here to fight. All Concorde vessels, move behind our formation and provide support where you can. We will take the front line. Admiral, Veltaris responded. The Kethvor adapt to all weapons. Our most powerful technologies could not harm them. Your technologies, Okonkwo said simply, not ours. Stay behind us, watch, and learn. The human fleet moved forward, placing itself between the Concorde remnants and the approaching swarm. The Kethvor were visible now, a vast cloud of metal bodies that blotted out the stars. Billions of drones, each one capable of independent thought, each one connected to all the others. Together, they were a mind larger than any living thing. They had destroyed the Velkari First Fleet in hours. They expected to do the same to these new enemies. They were wrong. All ships, Okonkwo commanded, weapons free. The human fleet opened fire. The first wave of weapons were kinetic impactors. Thousands of tungsten rods, each one the size of a ground vehicle, accelerated to incredible speeds. They crossed the void in seconds and struck the Kethvor swarm with the force of nuclear explosions. Drones shattered, debris scattered. Holes opened in the swarm like wounds. The Kethvor tried to adapt. They made their hulls denser, harder. But kinetic weapons did not care about adaptation. A heavy object moving fast would always destroy whatever it hit. Physics could not be fooled. The second wave came. Thermobaric missiles, thousands of them, launched from the human carriers. They flew into the swarm and detonated in massive explosions of heat and pressure. The blasts created spheres of superheated gas that expanded outward, burning everything they touched. Drones melted. Metal turned to liquid. The swarm screamed across its network as millions of units died in seconds. The Kethvor tried to spread out, to avoid the area weapons. But humans had prepared for this too. The Helios-class destroyers moved forward, their massive fusion arrays glowing with building energy. Commander Sarah Chen gave the order. Fire, main weapon. The Inferno released its beam. It was not like the elegant light weapons of the Velkari. It was raw and brutal. A stream of plasma heated to temperatures found only in the hearts of stars. The beam cut through the swarm like a blade through paper. Everything it touched simply stopped existing. Across the battlefield, other Helios destroyers fired. Beams of stellar fire crisscrossed the void. The HFY tried to adapt, to create heat-resistant hulls, but the temperatures were too extreme. No material could survive contact with the surface of a sun. The swarm pulled back, confused for the first time in its existence. These enemies did not fight like the others. They did not use clean energy that could be absorbed. They used physical force, chemical reactions, nuclear fire. Old things, primitive things, deadly things. But the HFY were ancient and patient. They had destroyed 17 civilizations by adapting. They would adapt to this too. The swarm changed tactics. Instead of advancing in a mass, they split into smaller groups. They attacked from multiple directions. They tried to overwhelm individual ships with numbers. Admiral Okonkwo had expected this. All ships, execute pattern Omega. Marines, prepare for boarding defense. The human fleet shifted formation. Ships moved to cover each other. Point defense guns filled the space around each vessel with walls of bullets. Any drone that came close was torn apart by kinetic fire. But the swarm was endless. For every drone that died, 10 more came. Slowly, inevitably, some broke through. A swarm of HFY drones latched onto the hull of the destroyer. Relentless, they began cutting through the armor, trying to reach the crew inside. But they did not know about human Marines. Lieutenant Miguel Santos led his squad through the corridors of the Relentless, their powered armor making them nearly as strong as the machines they fought. They carried weapons that fired explosive rounds, flamethrowers that sprayed burning chemical compounds, and blades that could cut through metal. Contact ahead, his helmet display reported. 40 hostiles. Santos smiled. Only 40? That hardly seems fair. For them, the Marines charged. They met the drones in close combat, and the corridor became a chaos of fire and blood and metal. The HFY were dangerous, but they had never fought creatures that ran toward death instead of away from it. They had never fought humans. Santos punched his fist through a drone's head, then turned and burned 3 more with his flamethrower. His squad fought beside him, moving and killing with practiced coordination. In 5 minutes, the boarding party was destroyed. Hull secure, Santos reported. Ready for more. Similar battles were happening across the fleet. Drones that breached human ships found not defenseless crews but armored warriors eager for close combat. The HFY could adapt to many things, but they could not adapt to the basic human willingness to fight and die. Hours passed. The battle continued. Human ships took damage. Some were destroyed. The carrier Eternal Flame was overwhelmed by drones and torn apart. The destroyer Thunder of Earth was hit by concentrated fire and exploded. Thousands of humans died, but for every human ship lost, millions of drones were destroyed. The swarm was shrinking. For the first time in 10,000 years, the HFY were losing. The swarm's collective mind made a calculation. At this rate of loss, they would be destroyed before they could adapt sufficiently. They needed to retreat, to rebuild, to study these new enemies and find weaknesses. They began to pull back. Admiral Okonkwo saw the retreat on his sensors. He did not feel victory. He felt anger. The swarm had killed his people. It would not escape to kill more. All ships pursue, he ordered. Do not let them escape. The human fleet surged forward, continuing to fire. Kinetic rounds, missiles, fusion beams. The retreating swarm burned behind them. High Archon Velteris watched from his ship, unable to speak. He had seen the impossible. He had seen primitive technology defeat an enemy that his people could not scratch. He had seen humans fight with a ferocity that made his own warriors look timid. Most of all, he had watched a human destroyer, its hull torn open and burning, rammed directly into a HFY command sphere. Just before impact, the ship detonated its own reactor. The explosion destroyed the command sphere and everything around it. The crew had chosen death to kill more enemies. Velteris finally understood. He understood why humans had mastered fire. He understood why they still used it when cleaner technologies existed. Fire was not just a tool to them. It was a philosophy. It was a willingness to burn themselves if it meant burning their enemies too. The battle ended. The swarm was broken, fleeing into the darkness between stars. They would return someday, but not soon. They had learned fear. Admiral Okonkwo looked at his fleet. Of 800 ships, 563 remained. Over 60,000 humans had died. It was a terrible cost, but they had won. "Send a message to Earth," he said quietly. "Tell them the fire still burns." 3 months had passed since the Battle of the Burning Void. The galaxy was still healing. The HFY had been pushed back to the outer veil, where joint fleets of humans and Concord species now patrolled constantly. The swarm had not disappeared, but it had stopped advancing. It waited in the darkness, watching and learning. But it no longer attacked. On Earth, the names of the fallen were carved into monuments. 60,000 human beings had died in a single battle to save species that had mocked them. Families mourned. Children grew up without parents. The cost of victory was counted in tears. But Earth did not stop building. New ships rose from the shipyards every day. The fleet that had been reduced to 500 was growing again. Humanity had learned a lesson from the war. The galaxy was dangerous, and only the strong survived. Ambassador Elena Vasquez returned to Nexus Station on a clear morning in early spring. The station looked the same as it had months ago, with its crystal towers and golden domes. But the atmosphere was different. Where once she had been met with laughter and contempt, now she was met with respect and curiosity. The assembly hall was full when she entered. Representatives from all 47 Concord species were present. They rose as she walked to the central platform, a gesture of honor that humans had never received before. High Archon Veltaris stood at the front of the chamber. His crystalline body seemed less bright than before, as if the weight of recent events had dimmed his inner light. He looked at Elena with eyes that held no more arrogance. "Ambassador Vasquez," he said, his voice carrying through the silent hall, "we have asked you here to correct a mistake." He paused, gathering himself. What he was about to say clearly cost him his pride. "Months ago, we denied humanity membership in the Galactic Concord. We called you primitive. We laughed at your ships and your technology. We believed that our way was the only way, and that species who still used fire were beneath us." The hall remained silent. Many of the alien representatives looked down at the floor. "We were wrong," Veltaris continued. "When the HFY returned, our most advanced weapons failed. Our finest fleets were destroyed. We faced extinction, and we could do nothing to stop it. And then the humans came." He turned to face Elena directly. "Your people fought with weapons we considered outdated. They used fire and metal and brute force. And they won. They did what we could not. They bled for us, died for us, saved us from an enemy we had created through our own arrogance." Veltaris bowed. It was a deep bow, one of complete respect. Around the hall, other representatives followed. Chitrak's queens lowered their heads. Sithar elders inclined their bodies. 47 species bowed to the human ambassador. "On behalf of the Galactic Concord," Veltaris said, "I offer humanity not just membership, but a seat on the High Council. You have earned it with your blood." Elena stood quietly for a moment. She thought of the 60,000 humans who had died. She thought of the ships burning in the void. She thought of Admiral Okonkwo, who had led the charge and brought his people home. "We accept," she said simply. "Not because we wanted power or recognition, but because the galaxy needs unity to face what is coming. The HFY are not gone. They will return. And when they do, we must stand together." The hall erupted in applause. It was a strange sound, made by dozens of different species using dozens of different methods. But it all meant the same thing: welcome. After the ceremony, Veltaris asked to speak with Elena privately. They met in a small chamber overlooking the stars. "I need to understand something," the High Archon said. "How does your species fight the way you do? Our warriors are brave, but your people charge into certain death without hesitation. Your ships ram enemies even when escape is possible. What makes humans willing to burn themselves to destroy their enemies?" Elena looked out at the stars for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft but steady. "We are a species that learned to survive by mastering fire," she said. "1 million years ago, our ancestors were small and weak. They could not outrun predators or outfight them. But they learned to make fire. Fire kept them warm when the world turned cold. Fire lit their way through dark nights. Fire cooked their food and made them strong." She turned to face Veltaris. "But fire also burned. It destroyed forests and villages and cities. Throughout our history, we have used fire against each other in terrible wars. We burned our own world nearly to death before we learned wisdom. We know better than any species what fire can do, both to create and to destroy. Veltaris listened in silence. You evolved beyond fire, Elena continued. You found cleaner energy, more elegant weapons. You forgot what fire really means. But we never forgot. Fire is not just a tool to us. It is transformation. It is the knowledge that destruction and creation are two sides of the same force. She smiled slightly. When you laughed at our ships, you saw primitives playing with dangerous toys. You did not see the truth. You did not see that we have already faced annihilation by our own hands. We nearly destroyed ourselves with our own fire. And we survived. We learned. We became stronger. Elena stepped closer to Veltaris. The HFY were just another fire. Another threat that would burn us if we did not learn to control it. And humans have never met a fire we could not walk through. It might hurt us. It might kill some of us. But we will always walk through, and we will come out the other side. Veltaris was silent for a long time. Then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I think I finally understand. Your species does not fear fire because you are fire. It is in your hearts. It is what you are. Yes, Elena agreed. And now that fire burns for the whole galaxy. Whatever comes next, whatever threats appear in the darkness, humanity will be there. We will fight. We will burn, and we will protect. She offered her hand. Veltaris looked at it for a moment, then took it in his own crystalline fingers. Perhaps, he said, fire is not so primitive after all. Outside, human ships patrolled alongside vessels from a dozen species. Their engines still burned with visible flame. Their weapons still glowed with the heat of contained stars. They were different from the elegant ships around them, rougher and more brutal, but they were no longer laughed at. In the darkness beyond the outer veil, the HFY swarm waited. It had learned much from the battle. It would adapt and grow stronger. Someday, it would return. But now it knew something it had never known before. Now it knew fear. Fear of the small species that had come from a tiny world. Fear of the creatures who held fire in their hands. Fear of humans. And in the heart of the galaxy, a new saying began to spread among the stars. Do not mock the humans. Do not threaten what they love. They are the species that learned to hold fire in their hands, and they have never forgotten how to burn. The war was not over. The future held more battles, more sacrifices, more fire. But humanity was ready. They had always been ready. They were children of fire, and fire would light their way forward into whatever darkness awaited.